Hey, welcome back. Another Ask Me Anything Tuesday. So, super excited to be here with you this morning and answer your questions. I've got a few things I usually talk about at the very beginning and then just jump into answering questions that you guys send through. So, a little bit about my background. I'm the founder of a software coding bootcamp and now apprenticeship program out in San Diego, California. I have mentored, coached, and taught lots and lots of students and helped many over the last 4 years transition into technical roles. So, been a hiring manager at many points of my career. So, I know what it's like to talk to junior engineers and some of the challenges that they face when they're trying to get out into the space and land that first job. So, the opinions that I share are rooted in actually helping people get into positions. So I hope that this will be valuable feedback for you. And again, that's the only goal. So we don't charge anything for our program, so we're not like soliciting students. This is really an opportunity for me to just give back and help people that are somewhere on the journey to getting your first entry level role. And if I can be helpful in any way, I'm more than happy to. You can send in questions through either the chat box in Facebook or YouTube, or alternatively, you can send me an email. My email is mike@sdcs.io. Again, that's mike at SD for San Diego Code School, sdcs.io. And I'm just going to start talking a little bit this morning about one of the things that I think is kind of propped up. Let me get my note card here real quick. What to do with my notes? Oh man, this is a disaster this morning. Sorry, it's still early. Um, so while I'm looking for this, again, the process is usually way smoother and will go the whole hour if you guys just continue to ask questions. If there aren't as many questions this morning, then we'll sort of just pause once we don't have any more questions, double check, and then we'll let y'all loose a little early this morning. So I don't see any questions coming through yet, so this may be a quickie. Um, we'll see if I can get these. There we go. Okay, so the subject that I kind of outlined for this morning that I think would be of best help is last week we talked a little bit about shifting the perspective from supply or from demand side to figuring out or from supply to demand, figuring out what employers are looking for and how to approach it from an employer's mindset mentality, a hiring manager's mentality. This week, I want to talk a little bit about best practices to showcase your portfolio, GitHub, all of those things. So, kind of putting together that piece of the four pieces of the collateral that I mentioned quite often. So, when you're first getting ready to start your job search, or at a point where you're in your job search and you haven't done these yet, you need to pause and literally stop and make sure that your resume, that your portfolio, that your GitHub page, and your footer and your email messages are all solid. Those are your four pieces of collateral that you need to make sure that you've got nailed before you can actually do an aggressive and optimized job search. Because the first thing people are going to do is look in those places. And if they, for example, get an email from you and you don't include your footer information, like your phone number and how to get a hold of you, you're done. So you need to make sure that you're providing people with the ability to get back in touch with you. Resume's got to be solid because this is one of the ways that they're going to judge you and they're going to see, are you someone that is diligent? Can you make sure that it's got the level of information that's required, and is it precise, and are there any flaws in it? Because it's an indication, if you don't have one that's flawless, that you're not getting it reviewed, that you're not taking the time and care to do things right the first time. And so very hard for me to make a decision as a hiring manager to hire a junior engineer that doesn't provide a flawless resume, right? So of those four pieces of collateral, the one I wanted to focus on today is your portfolio and GitHub and what you could be doing to tune and tweak your portfolio or your GitHub, and then answer questions as they come in. So some of the best practices, first of all, for portfolios are, I suggest for most people that you not have it be all encompassing in terms of the time and effort that you put into grooming your portfolio and making it look super polished and super nice. I think it's time better spent on the actual projects that you put into your portfolio than on the portfolio page itself. So I usually recommend something super simple with a bunch of links to your projects, maybe some this is what the technology is that's used inside of some text where you describe the technology that you use, maybe some of those keywords that will help people to sort of identify, okay, these are the types of technology you're familiar with. This is your level of experience. These are the transferable skills that you'll have that might make sense for their organization. And then maybe some screenshots and a deep dive into like why you've created this project. And then if you can show some code, so the GitHub, link to where the code lives at, and a working production application, those are awesome. It's perfectly fine for you to stand up a Wix page or a WordPress page or a very, very simple, even a markdown document on GitHub would be a great place to showcase how to get to your work and really try and focus on that. Just making sure it's neat, it's consistent. There's a way for people to see what you're capable of through your projects. That's what your goal is out of your portfolio. So on your GitHub, you'll also want to make sure that you do a good job of pruning and cleaning up your GitHub. It's great if you're coding every day because you should be showing commits. You should be showing consistent commits. So you should have a green lit up coding trends there when they look at your commit activity. That should just be like solid green, dark green, showing you're doing lots of commits, lots of contributions, and you're getting your work pushed up to GitHub. So on GitHub, you also want to remove some of maybe the practice exercises that you do or code katas or any of the projects that are sort of like proof of concept, things that aren't clean and aren't done to your standards, right? And so you want to set high standards for yourself and make sure that the work that you're putting on there demonstrates your capability, what you're like, the best that you're capable of at this moment. So you want to have linted code. You want to have code that's following good formatting, best practices. You want to have READMEs in all your repositories. It's super good if you can showcase some of maybe the attributes of GitHub, like maybe create your portfolio as a GitHub page, right? And that way you can leverage potentially free or low cost solution for hosting your portfolio, as well as show that you understand some functionality behind the scenes and how GitHub could be leveraged to do something like hosting a web page, a static web page. Awesome if you can incorporate actions, right? That demonstrates, again, a higher degree of proficiency with GitHub. So you're driving people to GitHub. Then when they get to GitHub, they can see that you've got maybe some actions that you've deployed, and people will say, well, how can they see that? Because you're going to document in your README. You're going to say, I'm utilizing these actions. They're available on this GitHub. When you push to master, it does X, Y, and Z, right? So you can illustrate that on your README document in Markdown and show people that, hey, little badges, right? So you can get, if you're getting continuous integration, which you should be able to set up for free, you could use Travis or you could use CircleCI. Travis will be 100% free if you just make this a public repository and it's open source, right? So throw that on there, and then you can show the badge that it's building correctly, that it's passing tests, that it's linted, etc. So all your dependencies are met. So you can get all of those different badges and you can incorporate them and make your Markdown documents look really tight and really professional, and show that you've got the skills that on day one you're going to be able to contribute. You're going to get in there, learn the business, and be able to actually follow the best practices that are industry norms and standards. The last thing I would suggest is fill it with great examples of your passion for coding. So if you've gone to a hackathon, you're participating in your hackathon, get your code up there, right? Continue to iterate on that and see if you can make it a polished proof of concept of something, right? Put your passion projects on there. You want to have links to things that show that you enjoy coding, and the things that are of interest to you are things that you actually work on and you code and you consistently every day contribute into the ecosystem, make things available, right? So a lot of people are wondering, do I need to be involved in open source projects? Do I need to have major contributions, things like that? Not really. If you have some, awesome. So again, it'd be a great way for you to showcase you've got some repositories that you're opening pull requests and you're trying to be helpful out in the community. That's all awesome. So that's my tip for today. That's the pro tip for today. Make sure that you're really working on that piece of collateral and that you have that in place and it's ready to go, so that when someone does look at your resume, they click on the GitHub link, they get there, they see your portfolio, they see your GitHub, and they think, wow, this is someone I want to talk to, not, wow, I think this person needs a little bit more experience, or why is this here? Like, this is not something that they should be showing the public in terms of like bad habits, bad skill, things like that. So demonstrate that you've got some good skill, and, solid base doesn't have to be anything super fancy, but just everything you do it to your best ability. So I'm going to pause. I've had a couple questions come in, and again, give you an opportunity to either throw the questions into the Facebook chat, or you can throw the questions into the YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. And then finally, if you want, you can send me an email. It's mike@stcs.io. So the first question that I had was, it's about open source, and this is one that came via email. I'm new to the coding community, and it amazes me how everything works. I wanted to get into open source, but it's really hard to understand what to do and how to handle issues sometimes. Could you suggest some ways to approach this? Maybe there's a certain way of finding some GitHub repos that have issues that are easy to tackle. Sure. So here's one recommendation I'd say. I would say don't solely focus on trying to pick off easy issues. Oftentimes, what you'll find as you start digging in on repositories, that some things that may seem like they're tough or more challenging are actually, maybe there's options inside of some function, and someone is a novel use case for one of the options, and you just have to go in and you have to add a few more variables and a few more conditions inside of a function, and you can actually improve that functionality for that individual. Oftentimes people will do this on their own, and so that's how a lot of these PRs end up, being added to things. It's where you yourselves have an edge case or a use case when you're using a framework. It's not available. You don't want to wait for someone to make the change, and so you just do it yourself. You fork the repository, you do it yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of the times when those are forked, people don't actually open PRs to pull them back in, and sometimes that's because there's not great maintainers out there as well. So on the maintainer side, if people are opening pull requests and asking for their contributions to be accepted, they have to do the effort, to due diligence, to make sure that they test it, they pull it in, it's safe for the rest of the people that are consuming that library or that resource, that GitHub repository. So they do have a duty to make sure it's like safe when they merge things in. But if they merge that code in, then more people will actually contribute. And so being part of the ecosystem, I think, is more important than looking for the perfect opportunity to jump in. So jump in, make the attempt, see if you can actually debug something and you can fix something or add some feature or functionality. If you can't, no harm, no foul. You spent a good amount of your time and energy reading some other people's code and understanding and wrestling with it, trying to pull it in and troubleshoot, seeing if you can stand up the library and test it and see if it's functioning correctly. All of those things are super valuable experience, and that's the key. What you're trying to do is get the experience, not necessarily like some points or some sort of a scoring system where you can later say, well, I've contributed to X number of repositories. That's not nearly as important as the actual effort that you're making to get out there and to just debug and see if you can add, some logic or add some new feature to a library. So I wouldn't solely focus on trying to pick off the easy, like spelling errors in the README, right? Lots of folks go that avenue, and that might look nice because you're getting some like contribution points, we'll say, and your chart is looking green. But at the end of the day, you want to also be building skill, and being a human spell checker on README repositories, not a great use of your time. So I would say going into repositories, sometimes going into ones that are a little bit larger, a little bit more popular, are harder because you've got more maintainers in there. You just want to see, while you're out there using some of the libraries that you are interested in when you're working on your passion projects, what are some of the issues that people have with them? If they're not super big, if they're lesser used repositories, it might be easier for you to get in there and just find more ripe issues that you can work on, versus when you're working on a super large, like something that lots of people use, like React. It's gonna be more difficult for you to add a contribution to the React library than it might be, some smaller tool, like a testing tool, or something that scaffolds files out, things like that. So hopefully that helps. Another question that came through is, what are the best job sites? So I think I've mentioned these before. I don't know that there's a perfect site for both job seekers and for people that are looking to hire talent. I think it's very individual. Like some things work for some people and don't for others, largely because of your like a willingness to work with the tool and figure out like what are the types of candidates that you're going to get from this platform? Who are you excluding that don't use this platform, right? So the ones that I personally like, I'm a big network fan, so I think the best networking tool out there and that has ever been created is LinkedIn at this point right now. So LinkedIn is definitely the one that I would suggest for networking, which I think is one of the most important parts of doing the job search, right? And doing effective job search often comes down to networking. Next, I like ZipRecruiter. I think ZipRecruiter's got a good model. And so if you get into the ZipRecruiter ecosystem, it'll sort of feed some job leads directly to you. So that one's a good one to use. I'm a fan of Craigslist. I think Craigslist has got a good angle in that it's still fairly like it's like of the people, right? Super simple pricing structure, very raw, unfiltered. So there's a lot of noise on Craigslist, but it could be an easy way for you to find organizations that aren't into the whole like fluff and just trying to like do the easy stuff, but instead are doing the work to actually figure out like how can we reach audiences that we typically don't reach when we go onto Dice or Monster or Indeed or one of those. And then you've got the Glassdoor, Indeed, Monsters, Dice, like all of the other big boy players that are out there, but you know you are going to surface the same stuff that other people are seeing when you're there. So you're in a much bigger fishbowl. So sometimes it's just easier to start in some of those other places where it's a little harder. You got to work a little bit. And Indeed, it's super easy for people to just go in there and just click apply, 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 apply. So never do that. But that also is the reason why you just have lots of people in there making lots of noise by doing that. And so that noise isn't helpful for you. I mean, in some ways, I guess it is because you can stand out easier, but it also means that you're just going to be in with lots of other people. So, all right, what other questions do you guys have? Again, you can send your questions either through the chat box, or you can email them directly to me, Mike at sdcs.io, and checking my email here to see if any others have come through. Wish I had a producer that could do this while I'm doing the show. That would be fun, but we'll get there. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of email this morning, so I'm having to like fish through and figure out, are these questions? Maybe I should have like a separate form or something I give out. It seems like a lot of work, but maybe a text message, something like that. So we'll figure it out. We'll make this easier and convenient, but the best source is just to drop it into the chat box on either Facebook or YouTube. Those come directly through. There's a little bit of a lag between when I say something and when I see something, but we'll make it work. So what other questions do you have? And again, this could be anything related to the job search. Typically try and frame the conversation we're having around what's most useful for people that are early career, looking to get that first opportunity, get a foot in the door somewhere. And rather than me just opining about what I think is important or relevant to you, I just want to hear directly from you, how can I be most helpful as a resource? And again, this is purely with the intention of trying to help shorten the journey from where you are to a foot in the door, some place where you can make a big impact. So I'm not seeing anything else come through in email. Let me just check one more time over here. Okay, I got a few questions here about mostly job search stuff. So try and take these one at a time here. So, okay, so the first one is how many hours per day should I be preparing for interviews? So I think it's important to have a pretty set. First of all, treat this like a job. Treat the job search like a job. So try and be somewhat disciplined about if you had a job, right? You would have certain hours that you need to keep, certain activities you need to do a certain amount of during the week. So try and break it up and make sure that you're spending a good amount of your time actually preparing, which means like maybe doing some code challenges, coding, all of the things that are going to be necessary. So I'd say preparing for interviews implies, I think, doing like coding. So you should be coding every day, right? So that implies coding. That implies problem solving. That also implies you should be learning how to like whiteboard out your thought process and make sure that you can actually draw out how you're deconstructing a problem, and then actually being able to hand write out and hand code. If you don't have a whiteboard, that's fine. You can write on a piece of paper with a pencil. Just make sure that you actually are practicing that process for interviews, because it is very different from typing in your code and getting code hints and the additional muscle memory that you have behind typing. So there could be an opportunity for you to be whiteboarding up things, and at this point there's really no like solid way to do that beyond like actually practicing it, right? So you can't get that infused into your brain or in some other way other than the actual practice of doing it. So I'd say, and in terms of how many hours per day, I've talked before about the percentages, so I'm not going to give them now, but I would say at least a couple hours per day should be spent coding and then going through practice interviews and or practice questions, and being prepared for just the basics, the fundamentals. So a couple hours per day minimum. And you can always spend more time, right? You can always, and I know people were like, well, there's only so many hours in the day. Yeah, but are you really leveraging your day? Like my day starts at 5 a.m., usually ends at around 6 p.m., sometimes 7 p.m. So, I'm putting in good 12, 14-hour days, and I'm a business owner that like has no need to do this. It's purely out of the desire to be the best and to support my team in any way I can. So if you are in the job search, you should be dedicated and spending that much time as well. So it might take 10, 12-hour days for a few months for you to land an opportunity. And if it does, is it worth it? I'd say it probably is, since it's going to make a dramatic increase in your capacity to both earn and get to where you want to get in your career. So that's however many hours it takes is the right answer to that question. But I'd say a minimum of a couple hours per day, coding, solving code challenges, and ideally solving them with another person. So having to actually talk through your thought process, pair programming, or doing it with somebody else is going to be super helpful. Way more helpful than doing it alone. So how many job applications should I submit every week? Okay, so this is the how many series. Okay, so I would say the number of job applications that you submit per week should be relatively small compared to what I know a lot of other people preach and talk about. I would say you should be applying to about 10 jobs a week. That's about the number that you could do and do a really good job researching the company, reaching out and networking, and making sure you make a solid attempt at each company, and then following up with the ones that you've already reached out to before. Like a lot of this is just going to be follow-up. It's just going to be making sure that you are continuing to go back through the folks that you've talked to before and saying, hey, just wanted to circle back with you, see if anything's changed. Here's what I've learned over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Here's what I'm working on now. So you want to be constantly following up with folks until they tell you stop, don't send me anymore, or they tell you, hey, we'd love to come in, or we'd love to have you come in and have a conversation. Come into our Zoom room and have a conversation, right? So I'd say 10 a week should be your goal. You're going to throw them on a spreadsheet. You're going to track them to make sure that you're actually following up and making sure that you stay on a cadence where they're getting enough attention and enough love. I often hear like really high numbers, and I hear other people say, oh, you should be 50, 100 a week. And like, oh, I've applied to 1,000 jobs. Like, you're doing it all wrong. So just slow down, do quality, and you're going to have much better outcomes. It doesn't matter like how many that you're thrashing at. What matters is how many that you make a good attempt, that you've got a solid process behind, and you should be able to land those opportunities. At the very least, you'll start getting phone interviews, and then those phone interviews can start translating into regular technical interviews. And then from there, we can look at the percentages and see the fall off. It shouldn't take that many in-person or Zoom interviews, technical interviews, for you to land a job. For a lot of folks, it takes 2 or 3 as an early career developer. 2 or 3 interviews, and then you should be getting offers. If you're not getting offers at that point, there's something technically that you need to improve on, and that's something that you want to address right away so that you're not wasting a lot of time and effort. So Um, should I practice interviews using Euler, Exorcism, Code Wars? Sure, any are fine. It's not really the tool that I think is nearly as important as the process that you use, which should include working with another person. So it's really important for you to network, find somebody else that's relatively around the same skill set. They don't necessarily need to be better or worse than where you are, but someone that you can rely on to be there, sort of like when you need a daily code challenge or when you need to work on a problem, so that you can talk through your thought process, you can talk through your solution, you can like describe how you would go about solving the problem. All of those are going to be vital during the technical interview. They don't just want to see you quietly solve a code challenge. They want to hear your thought process and hear how you approach, because if you can't communicate technically, it's gonna be really hard for them to support you as an early career, junior dev, right? Senior is gonna want to know, okay, can you describe the problem? What do you think should be happening? What is happening? Why do you think it's happening, right? And so, what do you think you should be doing differently? What have you tried so far, right? So they're gonna want to hear you clearly articulate those things when you're stuck. And so during a code interview, if you can't articulate your thought process, it's gonna be really, really hard for them to draw out what the solution is and help you get to that point, right? Because you got to be able to effectively communicate to be able to get your questions answered in a technical setting. So beyond beyond that, I think it's also healthy to have an accountability partner, somebody that can help you every day be practicing for these questions and make it more like a ritual where every day at a certain time, jump on, work together on a problem, right? The particular format, the site that you use, not nearly as important. So if you want to use Exorcism over using Code Wars, have at it. Doesn't really matter. Exorcism is a little bit more focused on, um, regardless of the focus of the individual sites, the focus that you should have is on doing that. And I know 9 out of 10 people completely ignore this advice. And every day they just go off, and every morning they do a code challenge and they pat themselves on their back and they say, oh, I do, 10 code challenges a week. Or they want to spend their entire day doing code challenges because they feel like if they just get really good at doing code challenges, they'll encounter every kind of problem there is. And then on the technical interview, they will have already done the problem. So they'll just have to like remember back to the solution that they did before, and they can just reapply it and they're good to go. Doesn't work that way. So it's unlikely that you'll have a problem that you've seen before, or even pieces of the problem you may see, right? So it may just be that they change out the nouns and the verbs, but it's pretty much the same problem, and that's fine. But I can usually tell when someone solved the problem before, because they just like launch into it and finish it without making some of the common mistakes that people that have seen it for the first time will typically make. So it's also pretty easy if they go through one lightning fast, just give another one. And if they're terrible at it, then I can tell, okay, there's some process involved here. And that process is, I wouldn't say cheating, but it's just like it's not helping me to evaluate where you are. If it's just you regurgitating something you've already seen. What I want to see is when you face a novel problem, what is your problem solving process? And how do you get to the solution? And if I were working with you, would you be able to communicate in a technical way to be able to solve and work on problems together, right? So without those pieces, I think you're missing. So that's why your practice has got to be just important as how you execute on game day, right? The practice that you do can't just be always in isolation, always just like heads down trying to figure out how do you type in the code in the editor and make it work. That's not a great philosophy. And you're only getting like a fraction of the output or gain that you'd get if you just slowed down and did it what I consider the right way. So, what other questions do you guys have? Coming up on the bottom of the hour. So, if I don't have any other questions that come through, then we're going to end a little early, which is fine by me, but not sure if it's helpful for you. So I'll give a few more minutes to see if we have any questions come through. Again, you can send them through the chat box on either Facebook or YouTube, and I'll make one more pass through my email and see if there's anything else in there before we call it. I'm not seeing any here. All right, so we're gonna call it. Thanks again for dropping in. If you do have additional questions, you can shoot them to Mike at sdcs.io. Again, that's Mike at SD for San Diego Code School, sdcs.io. And I will see you again next week. Again, feel free to drop those comments or questions in either the Facebook or the YouTube. If any come through in like the next few seconds, I will answer them really quickly. But having seen none and hearing none, sounds like you guys are just off into the races and ready to get into your job hunt. So, which I know you'll be successful at. I know that because you're here, and that already distinguishes you amongst all the other people that aren't making the effort to like jump in and ask questions. So you're already ahead of the pack. Just stay out front. You'll be fine. All right. Peace.